The old action-adventure formula of the Zelda games, as groundbreaking as it was with Ocarina of Time on the N64, began to feel stale by the time Skyward Sword came out on the Wii. But then Breath of the Wild shot back into the mainstream, not just in terms of sales, but also in reception. It was hailed as one of the best open world games ever, with both fans and critics praising its new sense of adventure. In Breath of the Wild, open world meant open world. While other games often built linear stories into big maps, which you followed through GPS systems, Zelda was actually open. Icons were mostly set by the player, exploration came intuitively through the surroundings, and had virtually no limits thanks to the new climbing feature. It also gave exploration a survival atmosphere with idyllic set pieces. Losing yourself in forests or conquering seemingly unclimbable mountains, that was where the great appeal of the new formula lay. However, over the years, criticism became more noticeable, for good reason I think. One of the biggest shortcomings for many was breaking weapons. While this emphasizes the survival aspect and serves as a balancing measure in the open world, it's not the most elegant design choice. The main problem isn't necessarily that it makes combat feel clunky, especially with menus and controls that were weirdly counterintuitive coming from Nintendo. More so, it erased an appeal of the old games, which was being rewarded for exploring and puzzle solving with unique items or crazy weapons. At the same time, Breath of the Wild significantly reduced the scope of the once massive and unique dungeons. It was impressive to actually be able to climb every mountain, yet it was all the more disappointing when the reward was usually a sword that broke in the next fight. And since there were no large dungeons, it quickly became clear that beyond that you would mostly find copy-pasted challenges. All the bigger the expectations for the successor Tears of the Kingdom, which was in development longer than almost any other Zelda game. At first glance, Tears of the Kingdom seemed to repeat Breath of the Wild's issues. Weapon durability remained, and the old map served as the foundation for the new one. But actually Tears is not a rehash. In fact, it has quite a different feel despite the same basic map structure. That intimate exploring of Breath of the Wild has been discarded, kind of. Instead, Tears is bigger and more overwhelming thanks to two new open world layers, air and underground, and feels even freer due to the vertical gameplay that connects those layers. It's pretty flashy to throw yourself into the clouds via catapults or self-made vehicles, turning the old hurdles of Breath of the Wild into a stone's throw. But the most impressive thing is not that the sky is full of sights to explore. What's rather crazy is that from this macro level above, at any point you can go back to the old micro level on the ground. In a way, it's what Skyward Sword promised back in the day but didn't deliver. As banal as it sounds, some of the problems one might have had with Breath of the Wild were fixed by the sheer amount of content in Tears. There's still a few map elements that repeat too often, but wherever you launch yourself on the map, you land in vivid landscapes full of secrets and unique incentives that encourage exploration. Quite impressive. Even old Zelda-style sections were back, at least to some extent. The main dungeons haven't become much more complex, but they offer proper boss fights again, and come with more creative preludes. In other words, in Tears of the Kingdom it takes much longer before the map becomes predictable and boring. And while weapons still break too quickly, it doesn't weigh as heavily anymore, apart from the annoying menus and controls. Because also in terms of rewards, the game became much more varied. There are many more equipment pieces and upgrades, and the new summons are a bit like the old dungeon items. Plus, experimentation and exploration are rewarded a lot more through the inherent game systems. By having so much designed around efficiently traversing big distances, it's much more motivating to come up with your own solutions, emphasized by the new crafting feature. Which means it also feels like a meaningful reward to finally find a permanent source for the steering wheel component, for example. The small dungeons are still more like mini games, but can now sometimes reward provide players with ideas on how to make traversal even more efficient on the real map. The physics engine in Breath of the Wild fell flat because it gave you little reason to use it, whereas Tears of the Kingdom encourages experimentation much more. As a sandbox adventure, the map of Tears of the Kingdom could hardly be made any better. For those not quite convinced by Breath of the Wild, Tears offers the ultimate version of this new approach. But those who couldn't stand the new formula at all won't be happy with Tears either. You have to have tolerance for its new crafting feature, which admittedly doesn't have much to do with the old games. Personally, I also maintain that it couldn't have hurt to rebalance the weapons so they don't break and make the dungeons even bigger with even more items and many more boss fights. However, that old A Link to the Past formula just wasn't the big inspiration anymore. That old Zelda approach within an open world, meaning huge dungeons on the map which have many different enemies and boss fights that drop unique treasure with unique features at the end, that must be found elsewhere.